The weight of my father's signet ring felt heavy on my right hand as I watched the last of the mourners leave the museum's modern wing. My name is Olivia, and at 28, I never expected to be standing here among the paintings my father had spent his life collecting, surrounded by empty champagne glasses and hollow condolences. The stark white walls seemed to amplify the emptiness of the space, each artwork a silent witness to this moment. "Darling, you should really freshen up. Your mascara is running." Victoria's voice cut through my thoughts like a stiletto heel on marble. My stepmother stood in her perfectly tailored black Chanel dress, not a hair out of place despite the long day of performing grief. The diamonds at her throat caught the gallery lights, throwing prisms across the nearby Rothko. "I'm fine," I replied, turning away from her practiced concern. The gallery felt different now, colder somehow, without Dad's passionate discussions of brushstrokes and provenance echoing through its halls. Even the familiar paintings, pieces I'd grown up studying, seemed to hold different shadows. "As you wish," she placed her manicured hand on my shoulder, her collection of rings glinting. "We need to discuss the estate arrangements tomorrow. There are some matters regarding the art collection that require immediate attention." Before I could respond, Winston, our butler of 20 years, appeared at my elbow. His presence was as much a part of our family's legacy as the masterpieces surrounding us. "Miss Olivia, might I have a word in private?" Victoria's perfectly manicured nails dug slightly into my shoulder before she released me. "Of course, I'll be in the curator's office if anyone needs me." Her Louboutins clicked against the polished floor as she retreated. Winston led me to the small conservation room, his familiar presence somehow both comforting and unsettling. He glanced around the space filled with art restoration equipment before reaching into his jacket pocket. "Your father asked me to give you this after the memorial service." He handed me a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age. He was very specific about the timing. My hands trembled as I took it, the paper feeling fragile between my fingers. "When did he give this to you?" 3 months ago, just before his diagnosis." Winston's eyes held something I couldn't quite read behind his professional demeanor. "He made me promise to ensure it reached you directly." I broke the seal, unfolding the letter with shaking fingers. Dad's distinctive handwriting filled the page, as bold and precise as the brushstrokes in his favorite paintings. "My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, I failed to tell you the truth in person, and for that, I'm sorry. The gallery, our collection, the foundation, it all belongs to you. It always has, through a trust your mother established before she passed. Victoria doesn't know. The official reading tomorrow will reveal everything, but I needed you to know first. Be careful, sweetheart. In the art world, not every masterpiece is what it appears to be. Love, Dad." "Winston, did you know about this?" I looked up, but his expression remained carefully neutral, a skill perfected over 2 decades of service. "I know many things, Miss Olivia, including that Mrs. Bryant has been making calls to several prominent auction houses this past week." A bitter laugh escaped my throat. "She's trying to sell our collection." "Your stepmother has always been ambitious about art acquisitions." Winston's voice dropped lower. "But there's more you should know. The safe in your father's restoration studio." "Olivia." Harper's voice rang out from the gallery. "Where are you hiding?" Winston stepped back smoothly as my best friend burst into the conservation room, her dark curls wild and her gallery owner's badge still pinned to her black dress. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said automatically, then caught myself. "Actually, no, I'm not fine at all." I glanced at Winston, who nodded almost imperceptibly before disappearing through the service door. Harper grabbed my hand, her familiar presence grounding me amid the chaos. Talk to me, what's going on? Dad left me a letter. I squeezed her fingers, drawing strength from her steady presence. The gallery, the collection, the foundation, it's all mine, Harper. And Victoria's been trying to sell pieces behind my back. That snake has probably been planning this since before Dad got sick. Harper's eyes widened, her years of experience in the art world instantly recognizing the implications. No wonder she's been hovering around that sleazy art lawyer all day. What are you going to do? Before I could answer, we heard voices from the curator's office. Victoria and a man whose tone I recognized instantly, Daniel Parker, the family's art law specialist who'd once asked me out and never quite gotten over my rejection of both him and his questionable authentication practices. The will reading is tomorrow, I whispered, tucking Dad's letter into my dress pocket. Let them plot. Tomorrow they'll learn that the collection they're trying to sell isn't theirs to sell. Harper squeezed my arm. Want me to stay tonight? We could go through the recent acquisition records. I shook my head, straightening my shoulders. No, I need to face this alone. But first, I glanced toward the studio where Dad had spent countless hours authenticating and restoring paintings. I think it's time to see what's in Dad's safe. Olivia, Harper warned, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too many art world scandals, be careful. Oh, I will be. I smoothed down my black dress, Dad's ring catching the gallery lights. After all, I'm not the one who should be worried about having their forgeries exposed. As I headed toward the studio, my heels echoing against the floor my mother had chosen 30 years ago when she first designed the gallery, I felt something shift inside me. Grief was still there, raw and real, but now it had company, determination, anger, and a fierce desire to protect not just our collection, but my father's legacy in the art world. Your father always said this place held more secrets than the Vatican's restoration labs, Harper whispered as we crept into Dad's private studio after midnight. The carefully arranged brushes and preservation tools cast strange shadows in the dim light of our phones, and the faint smell of linseed oil and varnish still lingered in the air. Help me move this. I reached for the massive Monet reproduction that had hung behind Dad's workstation for as long as I could remember. The canvas was a teaching tool he'd used countless times to demonstrate authentication techniques. My hands trembled slightly as we lifted it, revealing the wall safe I'd only glimpsed a handful of times throughout my life. Do you know the combination? Harper asked, her curator's eye automatically scanning the room's other potential hiding spots. I smiled, remembering Dad's cryptic words years ago during one of our authentication training sessions. The best security combines the personal with the technical. My fingers spun the dial with practiced precision: Mom's birth year, the date of their first gallery opening, and the authentication code of his first major discovery. The safe clicked open with a satisfying thunk. Inside, stacks of folders and documents filled the space, but what caught my eye was a USB drive labeled Provenance and a thick manila envelope with my name on it. Look at this. I pulled out a stack of high-resolution photographs. They showed Victoria at various auction houses and private galleries, meeting with different men. The dates stamped on the backs went back 5 years, while Dad was still alive and actively curating the collection. Harper appeared over my shoulder, her years of gallery experience instantly recognizing the faces. Is that Daniel Parker? And James from Christie's. And, wait, isn't that the dealer who was investigated for selling forgeries last year? My stomach churned as the pieces fell into place. Dad knew. He'd known she was building a network of corrupt dealers and authentication experts. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. We froze. Quick, the safe. Harper hissed. We scrambled to replace everything except the USB and the envelope with my name, closing the safe and barely managing to rehang the Monet before the studio door opened. Winston. I nearly collapsed with relief at the sight of our butler. His perfectly pressed uniform somehow still immaculate even at this hour. Miss Olivia, Mrs. Bryant is awake. She's asking for you. His eyes darted to the painting, then back to me, years of service letting him read the situation instantly. She's in the gallery office at this hour? Harper frowned, her hand instinctively moving to protect the USB drive we'd retrieved. I'll handle it, I said, tucking the drive and envelope into my pocket. Harper, can you? I'll wait here, she nodded. Text if you need backup. I've dealt with enough art world scandals to know when things might get ugly. The harsh fluorescent lights of the office were jarring after the darkness of the studio. Victoria sat at the curator's desk wrapped in an expensive Hermes silk robe, nursing what looked like scotch in one of Dad's crystal tumblers. Behind her, the wall of authentication certificates Dad's life's work seemed to watch us accusingly. Couldn't sleep, she asked, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes sharp as an art dealer's during a bidding war. I was just checking the climate control systems. I moved to the monitoring panel, keeping my back to her. The lie came easily, preserving the collection had been drilled into me since childhood. We need to talk about tomorrow, darling. The ice clinked in her glass. Your father left some substantial restoration debts. The insurance premiums alone for the main collection. Really? I turned, leaning against the control panel. That's interesting, considering Dad's last quarterly report showed the foundation was completely solvent. Her perfectly plucked eyebrows rose slightly. You've been going through his files? Let's cut the act, Victoria. I pulled out my phone, pulling up the photos I'd just discovered. Care to explain these? The color drained from her face as she swiped through the images of her secret meetings with known forgery dealers. Dad wasn't as blind to the art world's underbelly as you thought. He knew about your meetings with Daniel, with James, with all of them. My voice remained steady despite my racing heart. What were you planning? To swap the originals with forgeries before the estate sale? You don't understand anything. She stood, her robe swishing dramatically. Your father was losing his touch. He was authenticating pieces that should have been questioned, risking our reputation in the market. You mean risking your reputation? I stepped closer. Did you really think you'd get away with it? I trained under him for years. I know every piece in this collection like I know my own reflection. Her laugh was sharp and bitter. Get away with what? Being a concerned wife trying to protect our gallery's interests? You're just a social climber playing at being an art collector. A social climber who owns this gallery. I watched the words hit her like a physical blow. That's right. Mom left it all to me in a trust. Dad told me everything. You're lying. But her hand shook as she set down her glass. The will reading tomorrow will prove it. Every certificate of authenticity, every provenance document is in my name. I moved toward the door. Sleep well, Victoria. You might want to start updating your resume in the morning. The art world has a long memory for forgery scandals. You ungrateful little, she caught herself, forcing a smile that reminded me of a poorly restored canvas. We can work something out, surely. We're family after all. Family doesn't try to sell forged masterpieces. I paused at the doorway, and family doesn't betray the people they claim to love. Back in the studio, Harper was pacing between the easels, careful not to disturb any of Dad's restoration tools. Well, she knows. I pulled out the USB drive. But she doesn't know everything. Not yet. I plugged it into Dad's computer, and folders of authentication records, emails, and surveillance photos filled the screen. Each file was meticulously labeled with Dad's characteristic attention to detail. "Your father was thorough," Harper whispered, her gallery owner's instincts immediately recognizing the value of such detailed documentation. "He was protecting more than just me." I clicked through the files, each one revealing more of Victoria's schemes. The evidence was damning: falsified provenance documents, doctored authentication certificates, correspondence with known forgery networks. "And tomorrow, I'm going to use everything he left me to take back what's mine." "What do you need me to do?" Harper asked, her expertise in art world politics evident in her tone. I smiled, thinking of the look on Victoria's face when she realized she'd lost control of her carefully curated deception. "Call Marcus. We're going to need all the family's legal expertise for what comes next." The morning light streamed through the gallery's skylights, casting perfect illumination on the masterpieces that had been our family's legacy for generations. Marcus strode into the restoration room, his presence immediately filling the space. My cousin had always been the family's voice of reason, and as one of the top art law specialists in the city, I needed that more than ever. "Little Liv," he said, wrapping me in a tight hug. "I came as soon as I got Harper's call. Show me everything." I spread the documents across Dad's restoration table: authentication records, emails, surveillance photos. Marcus's expression darkened as he examined each piece of evidence. "That conniving," he stopped mid-sentence as heels clicked on marble. Victoria appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of practiced concern that wouldn't have fooled even a novice authenticator. "Marcus, what a lovely surprise." Victoria moved to hug him, but he stepped back, positioning himself beside me among the carefully arranged restoration equipment. Her smile faltered for just a moment. "Marcus," he nodded coldly. "I hear you've been busy making plans for the collection. Someone has to think about preservation matters." She perched on a conservator's stool, looking out of place among the specialized tools and analytical equipment. "Olivia, darling, about our conversation last night? I've spoken with Daniel, and he agrees we should discuss the authentication concerns immediately." "What authentication concerns?" Marcus's voice was sharp as a scalpel. "The questionable provenance records, the restoration expenses." Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "Your uncle made some unfortunate authentication decisions in his final months." I pulled out my father's last condition report. "You mean these authentications? The ones you tried to dispute while Dad was on heavy medication?" The color drained from her face. "I don't know what you're implying." "Stop lying." I slapped down copies of provenance documents bearing signatures that clearly didn't match my father's meticulous hand. "Did you really think Dad wouldn't notice? That he wouldn't document everything about his own collection?" "Everything I did was for this gallery." Victoria's composure cracked. "Your father was losing his expert eye, authenticating pieces that should have been questioned. Someone had to step in." "By forging his signatures? By meeting secretly with known forgery dealers to plan the sale of my collection?" I leaned forward. "Yes, my collection. Mom's trust made sure of that." The door opened again, and Daniel walked in, his expensive suit failing to hide his discomfort when he saw Marcus. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked, hovering uncertainly between the examination lights. "Perfect timing," Marcus said, standing. "Care to explain why you've been helping Victoria authenticate forgeries?" I don't know what you're talking about." Daniel's eyes darted to Victoria. "Mrs. Bryant asked for standard authentication consultations." "Save it." I pulled out my phone, playing a recording from one of their gallery meetings. Their voices filled the restoration room, discussing forgery techniques and potential buyers for swapped pieces. "You recorded us?" Victoria's voice shook with rage. Dad did. I stopped the playback. He documented everything, Victoria. Every meeting, every forged certificate, every betrayal. He was the finest authenticator in the business. Did you really think he wouldn't notice the forgeries you were trying to slip into his collection? This is ridiculous. Daniel straightened his tie. These recordings won't hold up in court. But the forensic analysis reports will. Marcus produced another folder. Along with the spectroscopic examination results of the pieces you tried to switch. Want to guess how that looks for both of you? Victoria stood abruptly, her stool scraping against the floor. You ungrateful little, after everything I've done for this collection. Done for it? I laughed. You mean trying to steal my inheritance? Plotting to sell forgeries? Using my father's illness to compromise his life's work? You have no idea what it takes to maintain a collection like this. She gestured wildly at our surroundings. Your precious mother's trust, it's barely enough to cover the insurance. Someone had to think about the future. Your future, you mean? I stood slowly. Well, think about this. You have 24 hours to pack your things and leave. After that, I'm calling the authentication board. You can't do this to me. Her voice wavered between threat and plea. Actually, she can. Marcus placed a hand on my shoulder. The will reading this afternoon will make everything official, but make no mistake, you've lost, Victoria. The only question is how much of your reputation you'll have left when the art world learns what you've done. Daniel cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss. I met his gaze steadily. You might want to contact the Bar Association yourself before I do. I hear they take a dim view of lawyers who help authenticate forgeries. He paled, backing toward the door. Victoria watched him go, her carefully constructed world crumbling like aged varnish. 24 hours, I repeated, and Victoria, don't bother trying to take anything that isn't yours. Winston has a complete inventory of every piece in this collection. She opened her mouth to respond, but Marcus cut her off. I'd quit while you're ahead. You really don't want us looking any closer at those offshore art accounts, do you? The mention of the accounts, something I hadn't even known about, made her flinch. Without another word, she turned and fled the room. Think she'll go quietly? I asked Marcus, running my hand along Dad's restoration table. He squeezed my shoulder. Not a chance. But don't worry, we're ready for whatever she tries next. Looking at the evidence spread across the table, the forged certificates, the fraudulent provenance documents, the damning photographs, I realized this was just the beginning. The real battle for my father's legacy was still to come. The family gathered in the main gallery for the will reading, tension thick enough to cut with a conservator's blade. I sat between Marcus and Harper, watching Victoria hold court on the opposite side of the room with Daniel hovering nearby. She'd changed into a demure black dress, playing the grieving widow to perfection against the backdrop of our most valuable paintings. Before we begin, the senior partner from Dad's law firm announced, I should note that Edward made some unusual requests regarding this reading. Victoria's perfectly painted smile flickered. Unusual how? He requested a video be played first. The lawyer nodded to his assistant, who set up a laptop and projector. My father's face filled the wall next to his favorite Rembrandt, healthy and strong as he'd been 6 months ago. The room fell silent. If you're watching this, Dad began, his expert's eye seeming to examine each person in the room, I'm no longer here to defend my authentications, but I can explain them. He shifted in his chair, surrounded by the tools of his trade. Victoria, my dear, you're probably wondering why I let you believe you'd inherit my collection. The truth is, I needed to see how far you'd go. The color drained from her face as Dad continued, the surveillance photos, the recorded meetings, the forged certificates, I know about all of it. Every scheme, every forgery, every attempt to steal what rightfully belongs to my daughter. Gasps filled the gallery. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Olivia, Dad's voice softened. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything while I could, but I needed proof. Proof that's now in the hands of my lawyers, the Authentication Board, and the FBI's Art Crime Division." Victoria shot to her feet. "This is absurd." He was sick, delusional. "Sit down," Marcus commanded. "You'll want to hear the rest." On screen, Dad held up a familiar USB drive. "Everything's here. The offshore accounts used to fund the forgeries, the fake provenance documents, the conspiracy with Daniel Parker to falsify authentication records." Daniel stumbled backward, his face ashen. I didn't save it," Harper snapped. "We have the spectroscopic analysis reports." "My collection," Dad continued, including the gallery, "was never mine to give away. It belongs to Olivia through her mother's trust, a fact you discovered, Victoria, leading to your desperate attempts to sell forgeries before this day." The video paused, and the lawyer stood. "There's more, but first, I'm legally obligated to inform everyone that the Authentication Board is currently executing warrants at multiple locations, including Mr. Parker's office and Mrs. Bryant's private storage facilities. You can't do this to me." Victoria's composure shattered completely. "I made this collection what it is. I maintained its reputation while he was dying." "You mean while you were corrupting it?" I stood, my voice steady. "While you were forging documents and planning to sell fakes?" "You ungrateful little," she lunged forward, but Marcus caught her arm. "Don't make this worse for yourself," he warned. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Shall we continue with the video?" Dad's face reappeared, his eyes sad but determined. "Victoria, I loved you once. I believed in you. But you chose greed over authenticity, ambition over artistic integrity. The evidence has already been submitted to the authorities. By the time this video plays, your access to the collection will be revoked." "No," she whispered, sinking into her chair. "No, no, no." "As for you, Daniel," Dad's gaze seemed to fix directly on the trembling lawyer, "I trusted you with my collection's legal protection. That trust was misplaced. The Bar Association has received a complete file of your activities." Daniel bolted from the room, nearly knocking over a display pedestal. "The rest of the will is straightforward," Dad concluded. "Olivia inherits everything as her mother intended. The trust she's held since birth remains intact. And Victoria," he paused, "you have 24 hours to leave the premises before criminal charges are filed." The video ended. Silence filled the gallery until Victoria's laugh, high and brittle, shattered it. "You think this is over?" She turned to me, mascara smearing beneath her eyes. "You have no idea how to run this collection, how to navigate the art world's politics. You'll fail, just like your mother would have." "Don't you dare speak about my mother." I stepped closer, my voice low. "You're not half the curator she was. She built this collection's legacy, you tried to destroy it with forgeries. Security will escort Mrs. Bryant to collect her personal belongings," the lawyer announced. "The Authentication Board agents outside will want to speak with her afterward." As two men in suits appeared in the doorway, Victoria's facade crumbled completely. "This isn't fair. You deserve to be blacklisted from every gallery and auction house," Marcus cut in. "Be grateful if you only lose your reputation in the art world." I watched as they led her away, her threats and protests fading down the marble hallway. Harper squeezed my hand. "You okay?" No, I admitted, looking around the gallery where my family's legacy had just imploded, but I will be. Dad made sure of that. The lawyer approached with a stack of documents. Miss Olivia, there are some authentication papers to sign, and… He lowered his voice, there's one more video. Private, for your eyes only. I nodded, feeling the weight of my father's final messages, his protection, his expertise. The battle wasn't over, but at least now I knew exactly what I was fighting to preserve. The security system chimed at midnight 3 days after the will reading. I'd been in Dad's restoration studio, reviewing authentication records when Winston appeared in the doorway. Miss Olivia, you have a visitor. His hesitation made me look up from the microscope. It's your sister, Cassandra. My half-sister, who'd cut ties with us years ago after a bitter dispute over Dad's authentication methods. I hadn't seen her since she'd stormed out, claiming his standards were too rigid for the modern art market. Send her in, I said, straightening my lab coat, and Winston, stay close. Cassandra swept into the studio like a curator at a modern art opening, all designer clothes and sharp edges. She looked exactly like Victoria, her mother, but with Dad's discerning eyes. Well, well, she said, dropping into the restoration chair, quite the show you put on with Mom the other day. Bravo. What do you want, Cassandra? I remained behind Dad's examination table, keeping the barrier between us. Can't a girl visit her sister? She examined her perfect manicure, deliberately avoiding looking at Dad's authentication equipment. Especially when said sister just had their mutual stepmother exposed for art fraud? Half-sister, I corrected, and Victoria wasn't arrested. She's under investigation by the Authentication Board. Same difference. Cassandra leaned forward. Look, I know we're not close, but I have information you need to hear about Mom's plans. She's already meeting with black market dealers in the city, planning her next move. I pulled out my phone, hitting record discreetly. And you know this how? Because she called me. A smile played at her lips. Wanted me to help her prove Dad was losing his expert eye when he made those authentications, offered me a cut of the underground sales if I testified. And I told her to go to hell. Cassandra's smile vanished. Look, I may have left this gallery, but not because of Dad. I left because of her, because I saw what she was doing to his reputation, to our family's legacy in the art world. The studio door opened again, and Marcus stepped in. I thought I heard your voice, Cass. Marcus. She stood to hug him. Still protecting the family collection? Someone has to. He perched on the edge of the restoration table. Why are you really here? To warn you. She pulled out her phone, showing text messages. Mom's not just planning legal action, she's desperate, dangerous. She's been contacting everyone in the underground art market, trying to build a case that Dad's authentication methods were flawed. She can't contest what was never hers, I said, adjusting the UV light I'd been using to examine a questionable signature. No, but she can drag this gallery's reputation through the mud trying. Cassandra sighed. Look, I know you have no reason to trust me, but I want to help. Why? I moved around the examination table. You haven't spoken to any of us in 3 years. Because I was wrong, okay? Her voice cracked slightly. I was young and stupid and angry about Dad's strict authentication standards, but watching Mom destroy everything he built, I can't stay silent anymore. Marcus and I exchanged looks. He gave a slight nod. What exactly do you know? Everything. Cassandra pulled out a USB drive, similar to Dad's. Mom kept records of all her schemes. Insurance, she called it. I found them when I was clearing out her private gallery last year. Why didn't you come forward then? Because Dad was still alive, and I couldn't face him. She placed the drive next to the microscope. But he's gone now, and you're in charge. You need to know what you're up against. I picked up the drive, turning it over under the examination light. This could be a trap. It's not. She met my gaze steadily. Check the digital signatures, the metadata, it's all authentic. And there's more about Daniel, about the offshore accounts, about her other victims in the art world. Other victims? Marcus straightened. Mom's done this before. 2 other galleries, 2 other collections she nearly destroyed. She's not just a fraud, she's a professional art forger. My hand shook as I plugged the drive into Dad's computer. Files populated the screen, authentication documents, photographs, transaction records dating back 15 years. Jesus, Marcus muttered, scanning the contents. She's been running forgery schemes for decades. And now she's desperate, Cassandra added. She's lost everything, her reputation in the art world, her connections, her power. People like her don't just walk away from that. What do you suggest? I asked, adjusting the desk lamp to better see the screen. Let me help. I know how she thinks, how she operates in the black market, and… She hesitated. Maybe it's time to repair some bridges in this family. The room fell silent except for the hum of the climate control system. I studied my half-sister's face, looking for any sign of deception among the familiar features we'd both inherited from Dad. Okay, I finally said, but if this is a game, it's not. She stood. I've spent 3 years regretting walking away from our family's legacy. I won't make that mistake again. Marcus cleared his throat. We should show this to the authentication board tomorrow. Tonight, I decided. I think we need to hear everything Cassandra knows, starting with what Victoria's planning next. As Cassandra began to talk, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before an even bigger storm. But this time, at least I wasn't facing it alone. She's here, Winston announced, his normally stoic expression tight with concern. Mrs. Bryant is at the gallery entrance, demanding entry. I glanced at the security feed on my tablet. Victoria stood outside in a perfectly tailored suit, flanked by 2 men who screamed art crime lawyers from their expensive shoes to their leather portfolios. Let her in, I said, straightening my father's signet ring. It's time to end this. Cassandra touched my arm. Are you sure about this? Positive. I looked around the restoration studio where we'd gathered, Marcus, Harper, Cassandra, and our gallery's legal counsel. Everyone knows their part? They nodded as Victoria's heels clicked down the marble hallway, getting closer. The door burst open, and there she stood, somehow looking both immaculate and unhinged. Well, isn't this cozy? Her gaze swept the room, lingering on Cassandra. My own daughter conspiring with the enemy. How dramatic. Save it, Mom, Cassandra said. We know everything about your forgery network. Do you? Victoria's laugh was brittle as ancient canvas. You think your little USB drive tells the whole story? You have no idea what really happened in this gallery. I stood, moving to the front of Dad's restoration table. Then enlighten us. Your father was weak, she spat. He would have lost everything with his outdated authentication methods. Those pieces I authenticated, they saved this gallery's reputation. You mean the forged certificates and false provenance records? Marcus held up a stack of documents. The ones you created while he was on heavy medication? Everything I did was legitimate. One of her lawyers interjected. Mrs. Bryant had full curatorial authority. A forged authority, our gallery's lawyer corrected, sliding forward another document. The conservation specialist's report confirms Edward was fully competent when he revoked her authentication privileges 3 months before his death. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. This is ridiculous. You demand nothing. I pulled out an envelope. This is an official notice from the authentication board. You have 1 hour to leave the premises, or they'll press criminal charges. You ungrateful little, she lunged forward, but Marcus stepped between us. I gave you everything. I trained you in authentication after your precious mother died. You mean after you convinced Dad to send me to study abroad? I kept my voice steady. After you systematically isolated him from everyone who could expose your forgeries? You have no proof. Actually, Cassandra interrupted, we do. She opened her laptop, playing a video of Victoria meeting with known forgery dealers in a private gallery, plotting their next move. Where did you get that? Victoria's face went white. From your own records, Mom. You really should encrypt your authentication databases. The lawyers exchanged glances, one of them already backing toward the door. Mrs. Bryant, he said carefully, you didn't mention these complications when you retained us. Because they're lies. She whirled on him. All of it fabricated by an ungrateful child who owns this collection, I cut in, who has proof of your forgeries, your conspiracies, and your previous schemes. Yes, we know about the other galleries too. Her other lawyer cleared his throat. I believe we should continue this discussion after consulting with the authentication board. Cowards! Victoria screamed as they hurried out. You can't do this to me. I made this collection what it is. No, I stepped closer, you nearly destroyed it. But Dad saw through you. He protected every authentic piece while you dug your own grave with forgeries. I'll fight this, she hissed. I'll tell everyone what really goes on in this gallery. Every authentication secret, every questionable provenance. Go ahead, Harper spoke up from the corner. The art world would love to hear about your history of infiltrating prestigious collections and replacing masterpieces with forgeries. I'm sure your previous victims would be happy to authenticate that. Victoria's gaze darted around the studio, finding no allies. Cassandra, she tried, voice softening, sweetheart, you can't believe these lies about your own mother. Save it. Cassandra stood. I've spent years ashamed of walking away from this collection. Now I'm ashamed I didn't expose your forgeries sooner. Security is waiting, Winston announced from the doorway. Shall I escort Mrs. Bryant out? This isn't over. Victoria snarled, backing toward the door. You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming. Actually, I held up my phone, the authentication board does. They're very interested in your offshore art accounts, and the evidence of forgery networks, and the falsified provenance documents. Her face crumpled for just a moment before the mask slipped back into place. You'll regret this, all of you. Goodbye, Victoria. I watched as security led her out. Don't bother trying to contact us. Your lawyers can talk to ours. As her protests faded down the gallery hall, Cassandra let out a shaky breath. That's not the end. No, I agreed, watching Victoria's retreating figure on the security feed, but it's the beginning of the end. Marcus squeezed my shoulder. We'll be ready for whatever authentication challenges she tries next. Looking around at my unlikely alliance, my half-sister, my cousin, my best friend, I finally felt the weight of Dad's words sink in. He hadn't just left me a collection, he'd left me a family of true authenticators, stronger than ever. Later that evening, we gathered in the main gallery, Cassandra, Marcus, Harper, even Winston joining us with glasses of champagne. The paintings around us seemed to glow in the evening light, each one a testament to Dad's dedication to authenticity. To new beginnings, Marcus proposed, and old wisdom. Cassandra raised her glass. To real family. The setting sun painted the gallery windows gold, just as it had when Mom first designed it. I could almost hear her voice in the evening air, approving of everything we'd accomplished. You know, Harper said, your story's trending in the art world. Daughter exposes major forgery ring. People are calling you a hero in the authentication community. I just did what Dad would have done, I said, protected what matters, art and family. Speaking of protection, Marcus pulled out his phone, showing us a news alert. Victoria's previous victims are coming forward. Looks like she'll be facing more forgery charges. To justice in the art world, I finished, feeling the weight of Mom's ring on my finger, Dad's loop in my pocket. As night fell over the gallery, our legacy, I finally felt at peace, not because of victory or revenge, but because I'd discovered what Dad knew all along. True strength comes from protecting what you love, and real art endures, no matter what threatens its authenticity.